Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. This is the second part of the video entitled The Global Pivot Out of the Empire of Bullshit. And just to summarize for those of you who just joined us and haven't seen the first part, I encourage you to first watch the first part. But in other terms, the summary is the following. I have made the point that right now, what we have in our Western society is essentially the establishment of the empire of bullshit, which is characterized by a complete corruption of society by the intelligence agencies who have infiltrated our press, the press that doesn't actually report about the crimes against humanity committed against citizens. There are also other corrupt doctors and heads of hospitals who are doing human experimentation. There are corrupt scientists who are essentially also working on these experiments, corrupt arms dealers selling these microwave weapons with which people are assaulted in their homes, corrupt handlers running gang stalking networks, all of these people essentially deriving wealth from the state and getting paid for corrupt acts. Meanwhile, genuinely productive people being pushed down and essentially have to live several layers below the dregs of society, under a layer of criminals, and they're at the mercy of both of them. So when this happens to society, a society essentially enters nosedive. In the meantime, typically, the upper echelons, or the leaders, or the elites as sometimes they are called, live in a society like that. The leaders live in what I would call la la land, essentially. This is characterized by very, very thick layers of illusion around them, pomp and circumstance, ostentatious wealth, a lifestyle that is entirely based on hedonism, not very much on hard work, and actually doing something genuinely for society. It's also characterized by runaway sort of philosophies that are entirely detached from tangible values, sometimes distorted and also deranged viewpoints more and more. And if you want to find examples of that, you could look at past examples of, for example, the communist system. I'm just looking around for a book that I had somewhere here. Yes, here it is. For example, Marxism and Communism. There's a very good book by Richard Wurmbrand, which is essentially Marx and Satan, and this is essentially about Satanism being, and these crackpot ideas about Satan and Satanism essentially infecting, the upper echelons of the, of the so-called communist revolution and so on, and the thought leaders. And this is happening over and over. Actually, the entire Satanist brand of of essentially corrupting the leaders, enticing them in, is ancient. I mean, this is an ancient model. It's essentially a legacy system, and because it corrupts, once you use corruption to conquer a nation, it is extremely fast. That's why if you want to really conquer a nation, you corrupt its leaders, you degrade them, so that essentially what you're then doing is you're pushing one society down artificially using the corruption and corruptibility of itself. So it's essentially like a system takedown using the inertia of the own system, by empowering one corrupt individual who will then empower another one. And essentially with that you can make a society crash, and then with another society you can come in and take over, and you of course meanwhile keep the highest level for your own society. So this is why throughout the ages corrupting another society, corrupting its military leaders and so on, and its thought leaders, its intellectuals, have always been a very good way of conquering things. However, and this is why, by the way, it's so persistent. I mean, the Satanism and all this occult and this kind of, what it essentially is psychopaths trying to razzle-dazzle other people, and ideally other psychopaths as well, because controlling psychopaths is the most powerful thing you can do, because you're controlling ruthless individuals who are willing to do anything for you, just at the promise of more power and more money and so on. So throughout the ages, psychopaths have cottoned onto this, and this sort of crushing a society to then come in with another one is an old tale. And it has been with us, it has been pulled off over and over and over by miscellaneous groups of networked psychopaths throughout the ages, and this is still being done today. So what's possibly wrong with it? Well, what's wrong with it now is, even though it has been historically a very successful business model, if you like, now the profitability of it is actually about to turn around. and turn around quite violently. And that's because by now, the cartels we have, and the cartels who've typically done this, are now global. So if they pull another part of any part of the world down, they are essentially pulling themselves down. So what if they continue blindly, like a bunch of idiots, trying to do the same thing? What this means is they haven't actually understood their own reach and how they essentially have saturated. They have saturated the system. So this method has been used over thousands and thousands of years. You know, this group of godlike, deluded leaders where everybody else in society is essentially living in a criminal quagmire. This is not new. Now, again, in our Western society, over the last couple of decades, we have seen an actual plummeting, down of our societies after a brief boom after the Second World War. It's nosediving again. The idea being that maybe another country, maybe China, maybe other countries are moved in who have, higher standards, more educated people, and take us over here, and then for the cartel holders, they think that will be such an amazing thing. Now, even though this has been an amazing business model, quite demonstrably so, in the past, now what these people are not realizing, is essentially because of their global reach, they are essentially devaluing, in a sense, they own both this bit and that bit. So by doing that, they haven't actually gained anything apart from just do a lot of bullshit. Just create an empire of bullshit to then repair it again. Instead, the clever idea would be the new business model, whereby you ideally don't crash this society. If you already have, like most of the Western world, you do a quick system cycle, bring these two up to be side by side, and then you start moving up both at the same time. Because what you then have is a global move up. And then the leaders who can stay wherever they are, they can stay. That's what they don't understand. They think, oh my God, this means a loss of power. No, you stay where you are. We're just cycling the system to get an actual coverage under your ass. Do you understand? So this is what we're dealing about. This is what we're dealing with, and this is what we're talking about. You already own this. You already own this. Why make this bit shitter if you can actually pull it up and then rise on both sides equally? Because the fact that we're collapsing here is already evidenced by the fact, if you look at how many new inventions, how many new revolutionary teaching methods, insights, authored books, amazing poems written, anything, you name it, the typical, creative output of a society, how many of those do we have? There has been a decrease, even though the population is expanding. There has been a decrease in this. Why? Because people do not have the leisure time to author books and come up with new creative things that then would benefit the elite as well, because they typically are, few people, so they can't generate as many different things to benefit from as the base can. And these people can't generate these books and inventions and so on because they're being gang-stalked, they're being shot into with microwave weapons, they lost their home, they lost their job, they've got a bunch of bullshit problems that are purely created by the empire of bullshit that have never had to be there. This drop down was never necessary, but still is there because we're dealing with a bunch of legacy systems, and frankly the leaders at the top have lost control. They think they're in control, but actually what they're doing is essentially, in the previous video I explained, it's like essentially being a crazy person or the owner of a fleet of airplanes. On an airplane, knocking the pilot out of the way, saying, hey, I own this plane, so I do whatever I like, putting the plane into nosedive, then in free fall it looks like you're levitating, you think, oh way, I'm so amazing, I've just flown out of space and now we're essentially weightless because I have taken the plane so high. No, you are in free fall, that's why. And it looks like you're essentially levitating, but that's because everything else is also in free fall and is moving along with you, right? That's what's happening here. If you want to pull out of this nosedive, we have to first of all get these mad people who are still high on this exhilaration of floating to step aside and let the real pilots get back on, pull up the plane, hopefully before it goes into a tailspin, right? So that's what we're doing. We essentially need to get the pilots back in quickly cycle the system so that then both systems can equally go up. Because if you have this, you essentially introduce a system turbulence, shear forces. You know, people will start to take this over, there will be infighting, there will be crimes, you know, actual skirmishes of miscellaneous type. And essentially, the only thing we'll do globally is increase the proportion of bullshit in our world staggeringly. And whilst we're busy doing this bullshit, essentially, what is a real problem, and this is something that none of the leaders, no matter how amazing and how rich they are, can actually help. For this, we need the help of absolutely everybody globally. Now, these problems are the real problems, and that's the collapsing ecosystems around the world. Right? Now, these crackpots think, oh yeah, but we'll solve that by, let's just kill off 2/3 or like, I don't know, what fraction of the world population. Okay, well, that looks like a really amazing idea if you don't really think about it for very long. But the real problem with that idea, which I think there's plenty of evidence around that that's the plan, there's a small problem with that. And that's because our world has survived essentially that in the Second World War, and after that in communist times. So in the Second World War, a lot of people died, but in communist China and communist Russia, even more people died, right? Now, if that would be a model for success, those countries would have been booming amazingly, and their leaders would be, you know, heading the most amazing research projects and the most amazing everything. But it didn't happen like that. When you kill everybody off, there's no one to actually run the complex systems for you. And there's no one to actually generate this wealth for you. And then you are there in your little bubble and you think, ooh, I'm floating. And meanwhile, the plane is now nosediving, and at some point you're going to hit the ground. You know, so this is what it is. And there's a second reason why killing off everybody seems like a really good idea at first, but it's actually total bullshit. And this is because now, in the modern world, and this is actually a non-trivial reason. This is highly non-trivial, and I think this is why these people have totally ignored it. And that's because right now, we're not in the same situation where we were after the Second World War. And that is purely because of the complexity of our systems. And with that, I don't just mean the complexity of our computer programs or the sheer astounding complexity of our tax codes. No, what I mean by that is to even produce something like a calculator, like a keyboard or a toaster. It takes a supply chain comprising thousands and thousands of people. I have to look up the link, but there's one guy who actually went out and tried to make his own toaster, and that's a telltale sign, because, well, that he failed. That's what's really important. And that's because he realized actually every part of a toaster, I think a toaster consists of, I think almost like 1,000 parts, even more parts than that. So let's say 1,000 parts. You don't think about it like that, but then it has like little electronics and cabling and the coating for the cabling and so on. And the plastic casing for the toaster, the metal for this, for the inside, and another metal for the conducting parts, and yada yada yada. You have all this stuff, and every part of that is actually highly specialized. The plastic is such that it doesn't melt under high temperatures. You know, the actual cord, the electronics is inside plastic casing that's suited to that. And everything about a toaster, everything about these 1,000 parts of a toaster are essentially highly specialized. And if you want to produce any one of those, you in turn need a supply chain, again comprising thousands of people. So this already starts with producing the steel that makes the inside of the toaster. That's a highly specialist task, and so on. So if you kill off 2/3 of your population, especially if you kill them off globally, what you're essentially doing is you entirely kill off this highly specialized chain. You kill off the know-how, because a lot of the time it's not written down. It's like documentation for software, right? Try reverse engineering software when it's not written by yourself. Good luck. All of those of us who've tried know that this is like, it takes you, you know, orders of magnitude longer than if you'd written it yourself from the start. And the same thing will happen with all these niggly little things that are really down here, expertise down here, knowing about what alloys to use for the metal, for the plastic, how to produce the plastic, how to produce the chemicals that are then used to produce the plastic, how to, you know, make the chemicals in the plastic used to make the chemical in the plastic and so on in the labs and all this. It's like a vast supply chain, and in a sense the only reason we can have this standard of living is because there's an entire tower comprising thousands and thousands and thousands of people doing this specialist stuff. And not just that, because I have also heard that these amazing leaders of the world think, right, we have this big computer simulation, everybody's in there, and we will work out who is useful and who isn't. Well, if you're very top down, that seems like it makes sense. If you actually looked into detail how these systems actually work, you would realize that it's highly dynamic. Not a single company these days goes for 1 year or 2 or 3 years at most without cycling their staff. People leave, people come, people get trained, people retire, people become ill, other people get trained up, and there's this non-stop cycle. So essentially, who's useful now might be unemployed next year, and who looks unemployed, is on drugs, looks like the last dropout, might be the math genius of next week. We literally just don't know. All of these, when you actually take the time to look carefully into individual situations, individual storylines, and individual life achievements, you realize it's not just a linear progression as these people imagine. We're all just linearly progressing through their wonderful organizations. That's not how it works. People rise through the ranks, think this is a shit company to work for, go somewhere else, start from the bottom and get up even higher. Or they get to a certain level, change to another company and drop down. So there's a non-stop cycling. If you take a snapshot and you think, oh, these are the useful people, these are not the useful people, and we're going to kill off the non-useful people, what you realize is that these people start dying off, retiring, not fancying to work for you, going somewhere else. And the replacement, you have cut off this side of the cycle, so there's no replacement. So in other words, if you plan to kill off 2/3 of the world population within the next 10 years, one of the things that I can tell to, Mr. Jet Set is that your jets will be grounded, because the parts that will break, as they naturally break in jets, and there's non-stop maintenance for these high-performance engines, will not be able to be replaced. And if you think that you can ensure that the supply chain just for your private jets can be maintained, well, I really encourage you to do that simulation, because I think you'll find that you can't actually do that. Sorry, as I'm speaking, one of the shielding panels, which I have to use just to withstand the attacks from my neighbors, is collapsing. Just a moment. Okay, it managed. Maybe there will be a big crash. So as we speak, because we're in the empire of bullshit and I'm making this video, I am still being shot in the head from properties around me, because I am actually one of these victims under the gang stalkers, under the corrupt intelligence agencies, not helped by the corrupt press and corrupt courts, which didn't really allow me to actually get out of the situation. So I am really at the bottom of the empire of bullshit. So here we are. So this is just to summarize why I have shielding panels that are sometimes dropping down next to me, just to allow me to make this video. This is the reality. This is the reality in 2017. Today is the 15th of January 2017. And I am trying to explain how to cycle out of the empire of bullshit, being at the bottom, being one of those people who is being shot to pieces with microwave weapons, run by a bunch of absolute degenerate, morons, run in turn by a bunch of absolute degenerate psychopaths, doing in total essentially what's called jack shit. So there we are. Okay, so this is the big picture. This is why we need to cycle out of the empire of bullshit. This is why taking other countries over by pushing them down is a really stupid idea to do. And this is why killing off 2/3 of your population is a really dumb thing to do when you're dealing with highly complex systems. Because what will happen, to again make this very important point clear, is that your jets will stop working, because the many parts that go into a jet rely on a very highly specialized chain. If you plan on setting off nuclear bombs and meanwhile, weathering it in a cave in Switzerland or somewhere in I don't know, in Latin America, that's also a really stupid idea, because the entire ventilation systems, security systems may be automatic. Shield door opening mechanisms will rely in turn on the entire supply chain of software programmers, electronics manufacturers, hardware manufacturers, who they themselves might die of in this process, and then you end up in your cave with the electronic doors stuck and no one there to actually repair them. So this is why it's actually a really stupid idea. World history has shown every time large fractions of the population were killed off, like in communist China, like in Russia, communist Russia, like during the times of the Black Death and the plague and all these things, and cholera and so on. What you essentially have is you're collapsing your society for generations, and it takes generations to recover. And then eventually, you know, these leaders drop down, and meanwhile leaders who are the leaders of these societies, right, rise relative to these leaders. So essentially we have this sort of mechanism. So if you really want to be a golden, you know, you can stay where you are. This is not about revolution and you know, decapitating the leadership. This is about cycling the system down here to give it thrust up, right? So it doesn't matter that if you're in China or if you're in the West, there's equal thrust going up everywhere, because as soon as you go up everywhere, what you really have is you're essentially sitting under a rocket engine, because you have literally millions of people all thrusting up, all producing books, you know, inventions, companies, you know, finding different ways of making the environment cleaner, better, you know, doing transport faster, better social systems. And social systems are important because they pull everybody up. So this is why the global pivot out of the empire of bullshit benefits everybody, the people at the bottom and people at the top. So this is the why the global pivot is so important. And I realized I've actually made this video very, very long, so I put the how into a separate video. So bye for now. Please watch the next step, which is how we're going to do this. So stay tuned, but bye for now.